I am so glad that we have such a great group of people joining us today. I'd like to welcome everybody to our 19th annual RiversEdge West Conference. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. We hope that you walk away with a great deal of information, tools, and resources that are going to help or enhance your work. So that's what we're here today, is to share and learn. So thank you so much for all the participants and all the people that are about to share a lot of their hard work that is happening on rivers, streams, and our water resources across the Southwest. Our conference has been going since 2001. We've been hosting this ever since, so this is our 19th. And really what we hope to do is connect people who are working, managing, studying riparian lands, streams, and rivers in the Southwest US to share techniques, tools, information, updated resources that really that we can all apply to our work, that hopefully we can use to enhance that precious resource in the Southwest US. So over the next 2 weeks, couple days, 2 weeks, we're going to have a mix of live sessions, panels, interactive discussions, presentations of researchers, practitioners, students. We're going to have recorded field tours and workshops. So we do hope that you take a lot of information with you as a result of this conference. We have a lot of people in the backgrounds kind of working the IT and everything. So let us know if you're having difficulty. We'll hop on that problem and get it solved as soon as possible. We know some people are still getting logged on, but to kind of respect everybody's time, we're going to go ahead and kick it off. So I just want to take a quick minute to thank all of our sponsors. We couldn't do this without the support of these sponsors that you see on your screen. We are very thankful for their continued support, nonprofits, foundations, contractors, state, local, federal governments. So thank you so much for your support of this effort. We couldn't do it without you. So a big shout out to any and all of these sponsors that you see on your screen here. So I want to go over just briefly what today's agenda is going to look like. A couple changes for you. I didn't have time to update this PowerPoint slide, but we do have a couple changes. So we're going to do a little networking, a little icebreaker here this morning. I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. That is one of the changes. Mr. Dan Gibbs, the Executive Director of the Department of Natural Resources for Colorado, got called in to help with the state of the state address that Governor Polis is doing this morning. So Dan Gibbs is indisposed, but we have a great representative from the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, Amy Moyer. I'll give more of an update and a bio about Amy. Thank you so much, Amy, for standing in for Mr. Gibbs. And so that she will be our keynote speaker, and we're very fortunate to have her with us. So, you know, this morning's going to be talking about the implications of climate change. One of the things that we wanted to do with the conference is focus in on some of the impacts and factors that are really affecting our work, our streams, our rivers across the Southwest, and climate change is one of those big looming factors in a lot of our work. So we're going to talk about that this morning and this afternoon. We're going to take a time for networking and lunch from 12 to 1, and then we'll get back at it from 1 to 3, talking about adapting restoration for a changing climate. And then as an update for one of the changes for the agenda this afternoon is Bart Wickel and Catherine Hayhoe are going to switch times. So Catherine is going to, from Texas Tech University, is going to go at 1:35, and Bart Wickel is going to move down to 2 p.m. So those are just the two changes that we have for this afternoon. You can view your full agenda here at this link. We will have somebody in the IT put this link in the chat box so you all can access the full agenda. So that's kind of how the day is going to play out. So I want to take just a quick second and do a little icebreaker. We're going to do 2 polls. So just to get us a little, just to get us knowing each other, we'd like to know who is represented here, and if you've attended any of our conferences before. So this first poll that you'll see on your screen, if you could please click on what category do you most identify with? Researcher, tribal representative, government. Great. See a lot of responses coming back in. We're almost there. 80 of 100. So we're getting there. Okay. We'll give it 5 more seconds if you can click on how you're representative and who you most identify with today. All right. Okay. We're going to share that. We're going to share those results. Looks like we have a good mix: nonprofits, local, state, federal governments, students. We do hope we'll have private landowners and tribal representatives join us. So great, that's fantastic. Okay. I'm going to do one more poll. Okay. Okay, here's the next one. How many RiversEdge West conferences, or our former name, Tamarisk Coalition conferences, have you attended over the years? So we want to know if you're new to this conference, if you're a veteran. You know, kind of helps us shape the agenda and the content for the conferences as we move forward, where we know how many people. Wow, really big first timers. Almost 50% of the people on here are first timers. And we have a couple that have been to 15 to 18 conferences. That is phenomenal. So we do have a mix of new people and some veterans. Nobody has attended all 19. All right, well, we'll take it. Here's the results. Okay. All right. Well, great. Well, that was a good icebreaker. It's good to know who you all represent and how many times you've joined us. So we're gonna move on. Of course, it'd be remiss of me to not say I wish we were all face to face. I think we would all learn a lot more. We have a lot more opportunity for networking, but such as it is with COVID, we're going to do the best we can with the conference that we have. So we're going to just take a real quick tour of the Zoom. As you can see, if you kind of hover down on the bottom of your screen, your toolbar will pop up. Anybody that's done Zoom, you know, mute and unmute are the biggest keys. So make sure that you have your mics muted, and we would love to have your video on at least part of the conference. We'd like to see who's on. We'd love to see faces. It is part of our networking, but understand if you can't have it on all the time. If you have low bandwidth, go ahead and turn off the camera. We understand that that Zoom is tolling all of our internet capability. So we do wish that you would update the Zoom app to the most updated updates for the Zoom app. This will help with the breakout rooms. If you're running an old Zoom app, some of the breakout room functions don't work. And you can see that Zoom download in your chat box. So again, the chat box is a little bubble icon kind of in the middle of your toolbar. And then we will use that same chat box for questions, introductions, and to share your ideas and comments. So when the presenters are presenting, if you do have a question, put those questions in the chat box, and we will be getting those to the presenters so they can address those as they go. Simultaneously, if you're having problems, just add those problems into the chat box, and we'll get some people to work on the issues. Okay, I think that we will probably just touch on the breakout rooms. During the breaks and lunches, we're going to have breakout rooms. This is kind of simulated mini meetings that you all would have if you were in person at our conference. We're going to set out these breakout rooms so you can connect with your colleagues, connect with people that you know, maybe connect with people that you don't know. But when you'll have the breakout room, it's the 4 kind of squares at the bottom of your toolbar. You can click on those and you will be asked to join a breakout room. So this is just kind of we're trying to make the most opportunity that we can for networking as we go through this virtual conference. So if you're not sent to a breakout room and you don't see the options, you can just, again, put that in the chat box, tell us that, and we'll get you into a breakout room. IT and the Zoom functions aren't 100%, so there's quirks and bugs that we're probably going to deal with as we go along. So once you're in the breakout room, if you leave the room, click on the leave room in the lower right-hand side. 2 options that'll pop up. Make sure you click leave the breakout room versus leave the meeting. Leave the meeting will kick you out of the Zoom meeting. Not a big deal. Just relog back on, click the link, and you can get back in. But just remember that those will be 2 options as we're moving along. For our conference, as usual, we have some continuing education credits that are available from organizations. As you can see, Society for Ecological Restoration, Wildlife Society, American Foresters, and Range Management. If you are interested in getting those continuing education credits, please email John Leary. You can see his email there, and we'll get you connected with those continuing education credits. So we do really hope that you will fill out an evaluation for us. This helps us make the conference more relevant to you, the content, what we offer, the research, the practitioners. So we just want to continue to improve upon this. So if you're with us for the full conference or just for a day, please make sure that you go to this SurveyMonkey evaluation. It's in your chat box, the link. You can go directly to it and let us know how we're doing. We want to know the good stuff and the bad stuff. So please let us know that. We were going to test out some networking this morning in our breakout rooms, but based on time, we're already at 10:20. So I think we will go ahead and move towards our introducing our keynote speaker. I would like to introduce Amy Moyer. Amy serves as the Department of Natural Resources Assistant Director for Water. She works to develop and implement water policy in coordination with the DNR's divisions and Governor's Office, and has been with the agency since 2013. Her prior roles, serving as policy advisor for the DNR, assisted with policy development, orchestrated department's participation in NEPA, and a wide array of natural resources. Prior to that, Amy served as a budget analyst for the DNR, where she helped develop departmental's annual budget request, coordinated fiscal note analyses. And then joining the DNR in 2013, she worked with the city and county of Denver to develop the city's first climate action plan. Amy holds a master's in public policy and economics from the University of Denver and a bachelor's degree in communication from the College of Charleston. Amy, thank you so much for joining us and being our keynote speaker this morning. So I'll mute and take it away.
All right, thank you so much. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. All right, thumbs up. Again, Executive Director Dan Gibbs certainly sends his regrets. As many of you know, the legislative session kicked back off yesterday, which means we are always on call to head to the Capitol. And so Executive Director Dan Gibbs is over at the Capitol with the governor as he prepares to deliver his State of the State here in a few minutes. But again, Amy Moyer, I am the Assistant Director for Water at the Department of Natural Resources. I am really excited to be here today and deliver the remarks and talk about DNR's perspective on climate resiliency. And so although 2020 has presented some very challenging circumstances, from the pandemic and an economic recession to a historic wildfire season and drought season, our mission and responsibilities stay the same. And so I wanted to open by just explaining a little bit about the Department of Natural Resources. We are an incredibly broad department with a lot of functions. And so as quick background, DNR is organized 6 divisions. The first is the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission and the Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety. Those agencies are charged with regulating oil and gas and mineral development to protect public health, safety, welfare, and the environment, as well as wildlife resources. We also, under our umbrella of the department, have Colorado Parks and Wildlife. We manage 42 state parks, all of Colorado, 350 state wildlife areas, and a host of recreational programs. Moving on to water, we have 2 water divisions that many in this group may be familiar with. So we have the Colorado Water Conservation Board and the Division of Water Resources, who are responsible for providing planning and policy expertise, water future, as well as the careful administration of water rights today. We have the Colorado State Land Board. It manages state trust assets across the state to provide reasonable and consistent revenue for K through 12 education. And lastly, we have the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, which, as many in this group know, has been incredibly important this year, given our avalanche season, but they provide avalanche forecasting services and education for the safety of our outdoor recreationalists and the traveling public on our highways. But moving on to our climate challenges and last year's wildfire season, we absolutely recognize that Colorado is already feeling the impacts of climate change, which impacts nearly everything we do at DNR as we fulfill our mission. And this is especially true, as this group knows, for our riparian habitats. And so in a year where we've seen major drought in 100% of our state, and our 3 largest wildfires burn some of our most pristine watersheds, it's more important than ever for us to foster collaborative efforts and double down on resilient climate-focused policies that protect these important ecosystems. And just pausing on this year's wildfire season, it was absolutely a perfect storm of unprecedented drought conditions, of course, exacerbated by climate change, overly dense forests due to a century of fire suppression and inadequate funding for fuels mitigation, and human ignitions caused by more people living and recreating in our wildland-urban interface. And climate change absolutely exacerbates our wildfire risk. And so Colorado has experienced 20 of our largest wildfires in the last 20 years. Our recent average summer temperatures are even higher than the extreme heat that we saw in the 1930s Dust Bowl. And warming has led to peak runoff coming 1 to 4 weeks earlier, which can lead to further reductions in stream flows in late summer and fall. And as this group knows well, healthy forests are an essential component of healthy watersheds. And so the governor's budget takes significant steps to recover from this historic wildfire season and also prepare for the future. So DNR department is working with the legislature currently on 2 installments of $10 million for grant programs that will provide immediate support for recovery and restoration projects in response to one of the worst wildfire seasons that we've seen, as well as longer-term investments in wildfire mitigation, forest and watershed restoration, and large-scale stewardship projects. And so more specifically, this includes $6 million in the current fiscal year. So essentially, these dollars would be available in the coming months for the Forest Restoration and Wildfire Risk Mitigation Grant Program that's administered by the Colorado State Forest Service, and $4 million for the Colorado Water Conservation Board Watershed Restoration Grant Program that this group may be most familiar with. I know Chris Sturm is here and will likely talk about that program, but for rapid deployment of funds for shovel-ready wildfire risk mitigation projects and then post-fire watershed recovery projects. The governor's budget also includes $5 million for each of those programs into the next year for continued investment in critical forest health and watershed restoration efforts to help our communities become more resilient in the face of increasing wildfire risk. So we are excited for the governor's leadership on these topics. We know this funding is likely just a drop in the bucket, but we're hopeful that we can work with the legislature, get these dollars, and then work with folks like you all to get these dollars on the ground. But beyond our near-term fire response, I want to talk a bit about what the DNR is doing to adapt to climate change. And first, we're incorporating climate impacts into our regulatory and policy-making processes. The more our agency can do today, the more prepared future generations will be to lessen the impacts of global warming and protect our communities, public health, and natural resources. And so to highlight a few examples across our divisions, first, to talk about wildlife, our state wildlife action plan includes climate change vulnerability assessments for specific habitats, and our CPW staff are conducting cutting-edge research to understand how climate change affects certain species and look for solutions. So what does that mean? As an example, our staff are studying the temperature tolerance of cutthroat trout and examining what are the different strains of cutthroat that might be less stressed by higher water temperatures. And these strains may help us preserve the special species as the climate warms. Moving to dam safety, the Division of Water Resources worked with NOAA to model future increases in rainfall events, and as a result, developed support tools to enhance dam safety and community resilience in a changing climate. Natural and working lands is a major focus of ours at DNR. And so in 2018, Colorado signed on to the US Climate Alliance's Natural and Working Lands Challenge. And through that, we commit to managing natural and working lands to be resilient carbon sinks and to protect communities, economies, and ecosystems that depend on them. And so in 2020, the state staff at the DNR established an interagency natural and working lands task force to advance these programs, policies, and incentives to promote natural climate solutions. And turning to water, certainly the topic that's near and dear to my heart, we absolutely cannot talk about the future of water in our state without addressing the climate crisis and elevating our shared responsibility to both drive down emissions and be excellent stewards of our natural resources for future generations. And in Colorado, climate change most clearly manifests itself in water, and a changing climate amplifies the uncertainties in future supplies and makes planning for meeting Colorado's water future needs even more difficult. And as we adapt to a changing climate, we're focused at the DNR on collaborative and balanced water solutions that involve everyone doing their part, from our agricultural producers to our urbanites to environmentalists and recreationalists. And so as a few examples, we're working with communities to integrate land use planning and water efficiency. We're elevating watershed health and encouraging communities to come together to create stream management plans. We're enhancing our river-based economies and opportunities that support our statewide economies. And we're supporting innovative multi-purpose storage solutions. And we're exploring ways to assist farmers and ranchers and to promote conservation and efficiency opportunities. And over the next year, we're moving forward on the first update to Colorado's water plan, which is scheduled for release in late 2022. And as part of that, we're putting climate science at the forefront of our water supply planning. The water plan update will use lessons learned, be more accessible, and will evaluate bold new actions that will support Colorado's watersheds, cities, and rural communities and farms. And so as I wrap up, I absolutely want to thank this community and everyone attending this conference for your commitment and innovation and dedication towards projects that result in healthier watersheds and improve community resilience. At DNR, we always encourage and support partnerships, which are critical to making large-scale impacts. This group knows that almost more than any group. We know that even if we receive this funding for watershed restoration, we need the support of collaboratives, we need the support of researchers, we need the support of these groups to get the work done on the ground. And so we always recommend that everyone seek out opportunities for our grant funding and leverage the state dollars that exist. Just examples that I've mentioned is the Water Plan Grant Program that makes progress on these action-focused recommendations, and the Watershed Restoration Grant Program that I'm sure you'll hear about more and more today. Get involved with your local basin roundtables. In Colorado, we have an incredible stakeholder network to talk about water issues, and get involved in a stream management planning effort in your area. And so thank you so much for inviting the Department of Natural Resources to speak. Thank you for letting me fill in for Executive Director Gibbs at the last moment. And I believe Chris Sturm will be joining the conference next to talk about strategies to mitigate impacts from post-fire flooding. As this group, I'm sure knows, Chris does incredible work for us at the Department of Natural Resources. He has been such a leader and instrumental in our post-fire recovery efforts. We're certainly grateful for his expertise, and I know you'll enjoy hearing what he has to say and hearing about some of his research. So with that, I'm happy to open it up to any questions, but I will conclude there and just want to say thank you again.
Amy, thanks so much for your presentation and joining us. Department of Natural Resources is an important partner in all of our work here in Colorado. Yeah, I think we have, if you're open to it, time for a couple questions. If you do have a question, feel free to enter it into the chat box. Amy, I have a quick one. So it's great to hear that there's updates coming to the water plan, that it's a living document. What is the best way for people to feed information into that or being involved? Is the Basin roundtables the best way to be involved with that update to the water plan, or is there another way?
Sure, that's an excellent question. And we have set up an engagement website because as folks know, in our first go around for the 2015 plan, it's so important that communities and folks are involved in the water plan process. And it's equally important now that we're updating the plan that we have that feedback. So I will put in the chat a link to engagecwcb.org. It is a new platform that we've developed to provide opportunities for outreach. We have a survey on there that's open now. We will be hosting a number of workshops over the next 6 months on a variety of topics to feed into the water plan update. So we're absolutely entering into a heavy phase of stakeholder engagement, and that engagecwcb.org is the best place to start to get involved on a workshop that is coming up, a survey, or learn more about the process. Great.
And I do agree, the Basin roundtables and the stream management process is a great way to have a voice and have your concerns or interests represented at a local or regional level. So thank you for mentioning that. And we look forward to having that link. Does anybody else have a question for Amy before we move on to the meat of our presentations? I'm not seeing any. Well, Amy, thank you so much for your time and representing the Department of Natural Resources for our conference. we couldn't do this work without your guys' leadership. So thanks again, and give Mr. Gibbs our best, and with the State of the State address with the governor. So thanks again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Okay. We're very lucky to have such good relationships here in the state of Colorado with the Colorado Water Conservation Board and the broader Department of Natural Resources to do all the work that we do in the state. So we're going to keep it moving on. So we're going to go ahead and dive into our first block session for this morning. So this is talking about the implications of climate change. Sorry, that was a tough one to get out. But our first presenter is going to be Chris Sturm with the Colorado Water Conservation Board. If you don't know Chris is one of the, if not the champion for Colorado watersheds in our state. He's well-versed in watersheds in general, and he's going to be talking about mitigating impacts of climate change at a watershed scale. So we're going to have Chris's presentation, and then we will be joined by Chris at the end for a Q&A session, and then we'll move into our other presentation. So we're going to go ahead and get rolling with Chris. Thank you so much, Chris, for your presentation and joining us and being a part of our conference again. So mitigating impacts of climate change at watershed scales. Chris Sturm with the Colorado Water Conservation Board.
Good morning and welcome to the RiversEdge West Changing Rivers 19th Annual Conference. My name is Chris Sturm and I'm the Watershed Program Director for the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And I'm going to be talking to you today about mitigating impacts of climate change at watershed scales. And from my point of view, when I'm talking about impacts from climate change, I'm primarily thinking about fires and floods and a little bit of drought as well. Those are the three things that I primarily deal with that are the result of climate change. So the CWCB, just a little bit about us. Our mission is to conserve, develop, protect, and manage Colorado's water for present and future generations. We are an agency within the State Department of Natural Resources. And when I talk about water supplies relative to our mission, talking about different uses of water, and we can see those in these icons on the slide, and they include environment, agriculture, municipal, industrial, and recreational uses of water. So let's start with a little bit of science. We're gonna have a discussion that's going to include a little bit of science. We're going to get into just a tiny bit of policy, and then my favorite part, a little bit of implementation. We all know what a watershed is. There's different definitions. I think John Wesley Powell's is very eloquent in that it includes a social element. It includes the human piece of it, which is incredibly important as we try to mitigate impacts to watersheds, because within our watersheds in Colorado, we cross a lot of political boundaries. And so we have to remind ourselves to work across those boundaries at a watershed scale. So watershed and forest health. Watershed health is something discussed in Colorado's first ever water plan that was released in 2015. And we will be doing an update of that over the next coming years, working on it now. And so this definition is evolving, and I think it's important for us to understand that we define it as a measure of ecosystem structure and function. And forest health is a popular topic that's come up as well. From my point of view, I consider forest health just the same thing as watershed health, but there's a different spatial difference there, and that forests can be part of a watershed, but watersheds can be bigger than just the forested part. But when we're talking about mitigating impacts, and those could include fire and then post-fire flooding, We see impacts to ecosystem structure, which is often the trees themselves or plants. And then we have impacts to ecosystem functions, which a big one for water managers is the hydrologic cycle, and more specifically, the flow regime and sediment regimes. So let's talk about resilience as it relates to watershed and forest health. Resilience is one of those R words. I swear I've been dealing with R words my entire career that are difficult to define. It started off with restoration, and now it's resilience. So the Colorado Resiliency Office, their definition is the ability of communities to rebound, positively adapt to, or thrive amidst changing conditions or challenges, including human-caused and natural disasters, and to maintain quality of life, healthy growth, durable systems, economic vitality, and conservation of resources for present and future generations. That is a lot. When I think about resilience, I think about ecological resilience. And when I Googled it, the hauling definition that I'm familiar with comes up straight away. And it's the capacity of an ecosystem to absorb repeated disturbances or shocks and adapt to change without fundamentally switching to an alternative stable state. So here we're getting at crossing threshold boundaries or not crossing them. And in our approach to mitigating impacts, we're certainly trying to get back to stable states after disturbances. To get further into some of the work that the Colorado Resiliency Office has done in their latest framework, which is scheduled to be released anytime now if it hasn't come out already, there's a lot of discussion about resiliency across many different sectors. Natural resources is just one of those. But in the natural resources sector, there is a goal to integrate stream, watershed, and forest management planning efforts. And you can see the rest of the definition up there. But this is something that's really resonated with me from a policy point of view, because we do a lot of watershed planning at the board. And we do forest pre-fire mitigation strategies, forest health planning, but haven't seen these combined a lot. And that's where we're moving forward in trying to combine this planning and bring it together. So back to resilience and steady states. I have an example up here that's a sediment regime, because that's what I'm most familiar with. And when we think about steady state, we should remember that that's not static. It's still a dynamic state. And we can see this through patterns of erosion and deposition in stream systems. But then there could be a disturbance or a perturbation and a response. And then ideally we get back to the original steady state condition. So for me, resilience is the amount of time from a disturbance back to the original steady state. And so the healthier a watershed or the healthier a forest, the quicker that we could return back to, say, a flow regime that we're familiar with after a fire. That's one example. And so below, I've got a hydrograph from snowmelt driven system. I think a lot of us are familiar with this. But just keeping with a little bit of science, and definitions are important. Flow regime is made up of different things, and magnitude being the discharge of flow. I think everyone's familiar with that. Frequency, how often a flow is experienced at a given discharge. Duration, how long that flow lasts. Timing, seasonal changes, and then rate of changes from one discharge to another. So these are all elements of the flow regime that our environment and our society has adapted to. And so when we experience disturbances, say a flood after fire, we see big changes in this flow regime. We may see larger magnitude flow events, and the timing of those can peak outside of when we normally see our snowmelt peak, for example, and the rate of change can be pretty extreme too. And all of this can result into changes in the stream network that have impacts on our water supply. And of course, when we're talking water supply, we think of all those 5 different uses that I brought up. So there's two different studies that Department of Natural Resources has completed in the recent past, unrelated to each other. One of them was for the CWCB, that's on the right side of the screen here, and the other was for the Department of Water Resources. Both of these studies suggested a potential increase in short duration rainfall intensity of 5 to 15% in the state of Colorado. And that basically is just saying that as the atmosphere heats up with climate change, there's potential for the atmosphere to hold more moisture because it's warmer, which can result in larger storm events. Now, a 5 to 15% increase in rainfall translates to a larger increase in flood flows. Okay, keeping with a little bit more science, but bringing in our forest health elements into traditional watershed planning, the Colorado State Forest Service has recently completed the 2020 Forest Action Plan, and they serve up a lot of the data in the plan on the Colorado Forest Atlas. You can see a link to that at the bottom of the slide. I got an account to this recently because there's a lot of wonderful data here, and as we move forward with our watershed planning, at minimum, this data should be brought in with other data that we're looking at. On this slide right here is a watershed protection layer where we have priority areas where opportunities to exist to improve or maintain water quality and quantity. I drilled into this further and found a wildfire risk layer, which is a composite of different variables, including burn probability and values at risk. And those values at risk are societal and water supply are among those. There's other elements in there as well. So this type of data overlaid with other data that we have for watershed planning can be really helpful in directing us towards areas where we'd like to have implementation. Here I have the 2021 existing stream and integrated water management planning areas. So this is a type of watershed planning that CWCB programs support. It consists of capacity stakeholder building, assessment work, and then prioritization and implementation. Now the assessments typically are in the realm of geomorphological assessments, biological, and of course hydrological. Those are the three thou shalts in doing these types of planning if we're tapping into CWCB funding. And I bring this up because if you look at the different polygons and lines, we've got both lines and polygons represented here, we could see a lot of planning areas that would overlap with areas where we're concerned about forest health. And as we're doing those assessments, we can leverage a lot of work by paying attention to objectives in both realms. So the CWCB has recently brought on some experts to help us with our post-fire response. This is a reality. 2020 was one of the worst fire seasons in history in the state. And there is a need to come up with a standardized approach on how we're going to respond to fires. And here I have an example from the East Troublesome Fire, where we used hydrologic modeling and overlaid that with what we call values at risk. Those could be structures, houses, businesses, etc., and other infrastructure, culverts, bridges, roads, diversions, other reservoirs. And then we developed these heat maps to show us locations of concern based on magnitude of increase in runoff and the burn affected watershed. I use this as an example because it's really tough to get all this together after fire when you're trying to respond quickly, make very thoughtful decisions about values that need to be protected. And a lot of this work can be done in pre-fire scenarios when we're looking at forest health planning. A lot of the data can be brought in then. We can even run different hydrologic and hydraulic modeling with different burn severity assumptions to start giving us an idea of areas that are at risk. And then we can start developing projects to mitigate that risk. So I love this Healthy Meadows example. I keep checking my watch here to make sure I'm on time. And what we see here on the left is an example of a healthy meadow below a forested watershed, an example of an unhealthy meadow on the other side. And part of what we could do in pre-planning to mitigate for future disturbances is identify these areas. Do we have healthy meadows out there? Do they have the ability to attenuate debris in, say, a post-fire flood scenario? Or they look something like that on the right, where they're already unhealthy, and what should be a depositional area is contributing a lot of sediment downstream already, and in the event of a flood could likely contribute more. So it has downstream impacts to water supply. It has local impacts to water supply as well, and that this is not a healthy ecosystem. And if this is an agricultural parcel, it makes it very difficult to tap into the water, whether direct diversion or through wells. So identifying these areas before disaster can help us prioritize areas for protection or restoration. And some new tools that the CWCB has in this realm, one being our fluvial hazard zone tool. The FHZ is an area a stream has occupied in recent history or may occupy, or influence as it stores and transports water, sediment, and debris. And the fluvial hazard zone, in my opinion, could show us areas of risk and opportunity at the same time, and opportunities for community protection and enhancement of environmental and recreational attributes increase tremendously when we map and recognize this fluvial hazard zone. So if we're looking at a scenario of protecting healthy meadows, and knowing that they're going to function well to mitigate impacts from disturbances, then FHZ could be used to provide protection at a local level, maybe through a local ordinance that excludes development. So we have to constantly be thinking about protecting what's functioning well, or if we're doing restoration, then what are our strategies to subsequently protect it? This is a good time for me to bring up that we do have grant programs to support everything I've been talking about. We are fortunate in that we are able to put our money where our mouths are, and we have several different grant programs for watershed protection. That includes the Colorado Watershed Restoration Program, Colorado Water Plan grants for environment and recreation, the Healthy Rivers Fund, and the Fish and Wildlife Resources Fund. And if you want to learn more about those, please go to our website and look for the Grants and Loans tab, or you can contact me directly. So I'm just about done. I wish I had more time to talk about implementation, because that's my favorite part. But really, we will get into all aspects of that, including the planning phase, how to prioritize what we implement. But then when we get into actual implementation, we've been fortunate enough to learn a lot over the last decade, because we've been involved in some pretty big flood recovery efforts. And through that, we've developed a lot of different resources. And one example I have here are just some cut sheets for construction that are meant to be used almost like recipes in the field, in that they can be adapted. These are living documents, but it's a very good start. The example I have here is for soil lifts. We get into the materials that might be needed, the equipment needs, common problems that you'll see out in the field, and then taking you through the process of foundation and forming, and brush layering and backfilling. So all the different elements of construction are represented here. I will just leave you here with some examples of the types of disturbances that I have been seeing, and I really appreciate your time, and look forward to any questions that you might have.
All right. Thank you. We're very fortunate to have Chris with us today. He's an extremely busy man, and so we appreciate your information. I want to remind everyone that we do have Chris with us for a bit of a question and answer time. So in your chat box, if you could enter some questions for Chris, we'll try to get to all of them. If not, we'll try to link you up to where we can get answers to the questions. So Chris, we got a couple questions coming in. First one, have you been including sedges and rushes in implementation of soil lifts?
Yes, and that's a big part of it. Usually all of our projects have a riparian planting plan, and that gets into species specific information. We do have a resource, a database of riparian plants by county for the state of Colorado. And we often ask our grantees that are implementing projects to check their plans against that.
All right. Next question, how does the fluvial hazard zone relate to FEMA floodplain? Maybe FEMA floodplain mapping, I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm guessing Katie Yachts out there should be the better one to answer this, but it's not meant to replace our FEMA floodplain mapping. And those maps are created to inform risk, but they're static. So they don't adjust with time as our streams adjust. So the fluvial hazard zone mapping is meant to complement that and maybe show areas outside of 100-year floodplain maps that are still at risk. We do have a local ordinance that local communities can adopt. We developed a model ordinance. This isn't a state regulated program. We just developed a methodology. So any local communities that are interested in the model ordinance should get in touch with me because really that's the meat of it, to protect these areas.
Chris, I have a question for you about the fluvial hazard zone. So if you're in the state of Colorado, are people able to use the fluvial hazard zone mapping anywhere in the watersheds in Colorado, or is there specific areas that they can, what's the depth and breadth of that mapping tool?
Yeah, it was developed, the protocol was developed for the state of Colorado. It can be used anywhere in the state. There's different methodologies depending on where you are. For example, there's an urban methodology that's very different, or that's different from other areas. And we did have a pilot program that included communities that were representative of different geographic regions around the state. So it was tested out, and then we came back and modified the methodology or the protocol based on what we learned from that process. Yeah, so if anybody wants to read more about it, because there's a lot of great fact sheets there, and including some really basic information for communities at coloradofhz.com.
Great. Maybe we'll try to get that link in the chat box. There it is, coloradofhz.com.
Thanks, Katie.
Megan had a question. Your agency developed the fluvial hazard zone maps, or did other groups generate that data?
That was led by the CWCB with our consultants, and Katie Yacht and Mike Blazewitz were the leads on that. And then it went through a pretty robust peer review as well. You know, we kind of stood on the shoulders of giants with this, in that the Washington State and Vermont had their own protocols. So we started with that, and we brought in experts from both of those states to inform our process. So hopefully that answers it.
All right, well, we're right up against 11 o'clock. Chris, thank you so much for the information and representing CWCB and Colorado Watersheds. So thank you for your work, and thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, certainly. And if anybody has follow-up questions, please do reach out to me. I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, and I'm not used to pre-recording presentation, so it was certainly a little awkward on my end, but hopefully next year we're back to normal.
I totally agree. We're doing the best with what we got, but we're fortunate to have the lineup today. So thanks, Chris, and we'll make sure that everybody has a connection to the presenters and the participants today, so they can reach out. In fact, I think we have a participant list we're going to flash up here a little bit later. So, Chris, thanks again. Hope you're well, and we'll talk soon. Okay, we're going to move on to our next presentation. Greg Garfin from the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center is going to be presenting on observed and predicted climate changes in the Western and Southwestern United States. Greg, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll have a Q&A with Greg after his presentation.
Hi, I'm Greg Garfin. I'm a climatologist with the University of Arizona and the University Director of the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. And I'm pleased to speak with you about observed and projected climate changes in the Western and primarily the Southwestern United States. I'll be drawing upon material from the 4th National Climate Assessment, as well as more recent reports, this Colorado River Basin Climate and Hydrology State of the Science Study, and a very recent Future of the Colorado River Project report that came out earlier this month. The bottom line is that increasing temperatures have led to changes in snow hydrology, have increased drought risk, and the risk of disturbances like fire, and all of these things have an effect on the watersheds and rivers that we're concerned about with this conference. So let's start out by looking at observed changes in the southwestern U.S. Looking at this region in the circle stretching from California to New Mexico and Colorado, we look at the decade-by-decade precip for that region in the graph at the right, and we see there are some wetter periods, so-called pluvials, some dry periods, droughts, wet periods, dry periods, but no statistically significant trend in precipitation across the region. For the upper Colorado River Basin, this graph going from roughly 1900 to 2019 shows stream flow in the dark color, precipitation in the light color, and illustrates two things. One, the very close coupling of precipitation and stream flow, where precip accounts for about 60% of the historic flow, but also a slight decline in precipitation in recent decades. It's not statistically significant. Here's a similar map and graph of temperature decade by decade across the Southwest region. And again, we see some cool decades, some warm decades, cool decades, warm decades. But the big difference with temperature is the strong upward trend in temperature across the region. We see this same trend and the same kind of variability in the Colorado River Basin, and this trend line, the dashed yellow line, shows the trend since 1980, with most of the warmest years occurring in just the last couple of decades in the Colorado River Basin. These increases in temperature without a concomitant increase in precipitation have led to a statistically significant decrease in soil moisture across the region. Also, multiple effects to snow hydrology. At lower elevations where the temperatures hover around freezing in the wintertime, we've seen an increase in the fraction of late winter and early spring precipitation falling as rain rather than snow. We've seen earlier snowmelt runoff, and we've also seen less water content in the snow and less overall snow-covered area. These effects of temperature lead to reduced runoff efficiency in many basins across the region, meaning that for the amount of precipitation we're getting less bang for the buck and less water reaching the soil and our streams. For the upper Colorado River Basin, let me recap the trends since the 1980s. There's been a statistically significant increase in temperature due largely to human-caused climate change, a little bit to natural variability. Precipitation in the upper basin has been decreasing. That's not statistically significant, due primarily to natural variability, a little bit to human-caused climate change. The amount of water in the snowpack at the peak of the season has been decreasing. That is statistically significant, due primarily to decreasing precipitation, but also to warming temperatures. There's been a statistically significant earlier snowmelt runoff timing due to warming temperatures, dust on snow, and a little bit to decreasing precipitation. Annual stream flows have been decreasing. It's not statistically significant, and that's due primarily to decreasing precipitation, but also to warming temperatures. The increase in temperature and its effect on intermediate variables like the atmospheric demand on moisture, evapotranspiration, and various drought variables has boosted our recent drought into the ranks of mega droughts. Not as severe, but starting to rival some of the great mega droughts of the Paleo period. Increased temperatures have been leading to an increase in the longer frost-free season, which has led to some phenological effects in the southern part of our region, such as earlier leaf out and earlier bloom. The longer snow-free period and increases in vapor pressure deficit, that atmospheric demand on moisture, has led to some increase in the severity of fire across the western U.S., also increased acres burned in many places, and increased drought stress in combination with a longer breeding season for insect pests has led to conifer mortality increasing across the western U.S. In fact, studies have attributed confidently to the increase in temperature and its effect on intermediate variables such as drought and vapor pressure deficit, and increase in acres burned, such that if we didn't have the human-caused increase in temperature, we'd have about half the acres burned across the western U.S. We've also seen increase in heavy precipitation due to atmospheric river moisture along the west coast, and then further inland, an increase in heavy precipitation for monsoon precipitation. That doesn't mean an increase in overall monsoon precipitation, just in the intensity of precipitation. These are all things that we've observed. Now let's look at the model projected increases for the future. Based on assumptions of continued high rates of greenhouse gas emissions, by the middle of the century, annual average temperatures for our region are projected to increase 4 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit and roughly double that by the end of the century. To give you a handle on what increased average annual temperatures look like, Grand Junction's current annual average temperature is 52.7 degrees. By the end of the century, that's projected to look more like the annual average temperatures of Kingman, Arizona, which is about 4 degrees south in latitude. With precipitation, the projections aren't quite as robust. However, the pattern of increased precipitation at higher latitudes and decreased precipitation at lower latitudes is robust. The strongest and most confident projections for our region are for increased precipitation, winter precipitation in the northeast part of our region, and decreased spring precipitation in the southern half of our region. With increased temperatures, soil moisture is confidently projected to continue to decline across the region in all seasons. Increased temperature has continued effects on decreasing snow-covered area and snowpack and the amount of water in the snowpack, increasing the risk of hydrological drought across much of the western U.S. Heavy precipitation, because of an increase in temperature, which increases the ability of the atmosphere to hold moisture, is projected to increase anywhere from 10 to 20%, depending upon the emissions scenario and the time frame. That'll manifest as an increase in the intensity of atmospheric river precipitation along the West Coast, and also in monsoon precipitation, which may in fact expand to the west a little bit, but definitely increase in intensity. So not more monsoon precipitation, more intense precipitation with more dry days in between those monsoon episodes. What about groundwater recharge? This illustration for the 20th century shows from north to south across the West different elements of groundwater recharge, including mountain front recharge, primarily from snowmelt, diffuse recharge from precipitation across basins, focused recharge from intense storms leading to surface water flows, and then irrigation recharge from the use of irrigated water, either taken from streams or pumped groundwater, contributing to recharge. With a warmer future climate in the lower part of the illustration, again, we expect higher temperatures, wetter conditions in the north, but lower overall snowpack, and drier conditions in the south, leading probably to less mountain front recharge, less diffuse recharge due to increased evapotranspiration, possibly greater focused recharge due to heavier precipitation, and possibly more irrigation recharge as a result of pumping more groundwater to make up for less precipitation in parts of our region. The way that plays out in this, according to this literature review study in various basins, let's say the Columbia Plateau groundwater recharge area, is an increase in diffuse recharge due to increased precipitation, but a decrease in irrigation recharge, leading to a pretty wide range in the estimates of groundwater recharge. Looking at a geographically more intermediate basin along the Wasatch Front, we see all forms of recharge projected to decrease, leading to decreased groundwater recharge. And then looking at a basin along the border, the San Pedro River Basin, we see a projected increase in focused recharge due to more heavy precipitation, but declines in irrigation-related recharge and declines in mountain front recharge, leading to decreased recharge in that groundwater basin. For streamflow projections for the Colorado River, by and large, 2/3 of the models project decreased future streamflow, but there's a really wide spread with many models projecting increased flow, many projecting decreased flow. The most robust projection overall is for a earlier snowmelt runoff. So if we look at these hydrographs across the calendar year, we see the historic hydrograph in gray and the mid-century projected hydrograph showing again a earlier snowmelt runoff hydrograph. This spread in models leads some researchers to want to go for a more scenario-based approach. And this is the approach taken by the Future of the Colorado River project. So they've done resampling of historic data, looking at some historic flows from reclamation, including reclamation's stress test period, then a resampling of historic flows from just the period since 2000, focused on the mid-20th century drought, and from a major paleo drought in the 1500s. And then they're doing what they call temperature-adjusted flows. So they're taking the temperature increases projected from climate models based on different emission scenarios, and then using the historic precipitation, running that through the Colorado River simulation system model. And in all of these cases, the stress tests, the drought scenarios, and the temperature-adjusted flows, we see lower future Colorado River flows with really precipitous drops in flows based on those increased temperatures in the future. Doesn't bode well for Colorado River streamflow in the future. One last thing for fire, in the southern part of our region, lower spring precipitation, higher temperatures. Overall, the projections are for an increased risk of large fires across the western U.S. Basically, these climate projections are for an increase in aridification, particularly in the southwest U.S., due to increased temperature and its effect on hydrology and evapotranspiration. So the takeaways here are we have confident projections for increasing temperatures. These lead to decreasing the amount of water in snowpack, earlier snowmelt runoff, increased drought stress with increased risks of large fires and increased extremes, including more intense precipitation, but also more severe mega drought risk. So I look forward to your questions. Thanks for your attention.
All right, thank you, Greg. Well, got to be honest, I was hoping you'd say we'd have more snow and more water moving forward, but not the case. Definitely a lot to consider as we will look to future work. So thank you for your presentation. We do have a couple minutes for questions. Greg, we do have one right here. Is there integrated predictions of groundwater recharge regarding the roles of dams throughout the western U.S.?
So I need a little clarification on that question. I'm not exactly sure, Natalie, what you're getting at with regard to the role of dams.
Sure. I live in Northern California at the end of the Central Valley, and I know with the number of dams here, there's not much recharge of water into the water table. So I'm just curious if this is, these predictions are like purely for climate change, or if that's integrating like infrastructure such as dams.
I believe these were not including the role of infrastructure.
Thank you.
I'll endeavor to put the citation in the chat window in a minute.
Okay. All right, Greg, we have another one. Do you know of any studies that are looking at wildfires in the Southwest and asthma and impacts it has had on public health generally?
Yeah, I couldn't cite those studies, but I know that that's a strong area of interest in public health studies, for sure. And again, maybe over the course of the morning or early afternoon, I might have time to pop a few citations in the chat window.
Okay. Next question. Have you worked with planners to share this info? Curious on what their response has been.
Yeah, so there are any number of climatologists that have worked with water utilities and water resource managers, and certainly several years ago, the Bureau of Reclamation led the Colorado River Basin study, whether you liked the process or not. These kinds of results are definitely in the awareness of major water utility managers and others in the water management community. And I think the approach that that's used in this most recent Center for Colorado River Studies, Future of the Colorado River project report, which is a combination of using climate information from historic paleo era and also model projections to ask a number of what if scenario kinds of questions, is probably the most prudent approach. And it's the one that it seems like large water utilities, for example, Denver Water uses that sort of approach. And okay, enough said.
Okay, I think we may have one more quick one, if we can. Mark asks, given the dire forecast with regard to temperature and water, any notes of optimism, climate adaptation of the world politics, reaction of the U.S. nationally and other nations?
Yeah, well, sure. So there's there are certainly some initiatives for adapting to climate change, and sometimes that's couched in code words like drought or extended drought or severe drought. I think some of that, some of those things were concerns in the recent state drought contingency plans that were adopted in 2019 for Colorado River planning. I guess a major note of optimism for me was the announcement that by Chevrolet that they would shift completely to electric cars. So, I think we can't simply assume the worst every time, but as we're seeing with this power outage in Texas, we need to keep the most extreme situations that are even beyond the bounds of our historical record in mind as we plan for the future.
Great, thank you, Greg. We're going to have to move on. Thank you so much for your information. It looks like one person is interested in a source for the groundwater recharge, the graphic that you had discussed. Greg, I don't know if you're going to stay with us for any amount of time today. If not, maybe we can get questions connected to Greg and facilitate some answers to those questions. So, Greg, thanks so much. We appreciate all the information and you joining us today. Greg and Chris, thanks for staying with us. So if anybody has any questions from the 3 previous presentations, we can take a couple right now. It looks like we have one question. This may be for Chris, Millie, I'm not sure, but we'll just open it up. The decrease of runoff per increase in temperature that your models predict is eye-opening. Are they significantly greater than what has been estimated previously, or to what extent have these model projections been communicated to water managers? Maybe that's, I think, for Chris and your presentation, Millie.
Yeah, so as I showed, there's a great range, that 2 to 17%, and we came up with a 9%. I would say the uncertainty has been narrowed. I would also say that, the paper that got a lot of attention was Brad Udall and Overpeck in Water Resources Research, where they said, hey, there's this big range. Let's estimate maybe 6%. So that was one that got a lot of airing. And so this is significantly higher than that. And yes, this is people like Brad have been very helpful in communicating this kind of information. He's kind of my contact with real people out in the real world as far as getting this information to water managers. I think the Bureau's recent report mentioned it in there. I'm not sure how much full acceptance it has, or it takes a while for the scientific findings to filter through to the system.
Okay. Chris Sturm, Greg Garfin, I'll just give a quick second if you had anything else to add. We're going to do a little breakout networking thing before lunch. Do you guys have anything to add as a result of the presentations?
No, I think for that last question, I think Chris described the situation well, and yeah, if you go back to that Udall and Overpeck paper, I think that was 2017. They do, just based on the historic record, they do portray a pretty wide range in those estimates. I know Brad Udall was one of the investigators on this future of the Colorado River project that Jack Schmidt is leading up. And they used a 6.5% runoff estimate for each degree C increase, saying that was plausible and reasonable for some of the climate change informed scenarios that they put out just earlier this month.
Great, thank you. Well, Chris and Greg, thanks so much for your research, your information, and representing your organizations to our conference. I hope you'll stick with us, but understand if you can't. Right now, I think we're going to take a couple minutes to do a breakout, a networking breakout here. I'm going to share